What's going on, everybody? Hope you guys are having a fantastic day. My name is Vibhav Kanyadan, and I'm super excited to be bringing you the second episode of Fanatic Films. In this episode, I'll be grading every single team's 2021 NFL draft. Before I get started, this will be in alphabetical order, so I'll be starting with the Arizona Cardinals, and I will be grading on a letter scale of A plus through F. So like A plus, A minus, B plus, B minus, etc., etc., etc. So without further ado, let's get into my draft grades. So starting off, we have the Arizona Cardinals. With their first round pick, they chose linebacker Zaven Collins out of Tulsa. I actually really like this pick. I had Zaven Collins going at the end of the first round. I think they should have taken JOK over Zaven Collins, so it's a little bit of a reach. Nevertheless, he's still a great player who replaces someone who they lost in the offseason, Hassan Reddick, who went to the Panthers. I do think that Zaven Collins is more versatile than Hassan Reddick proved to be in Arizona. And so I think that he's going to be a very, very valuable addition to that linebacking core, especially along with Isaiah Simmons and Jordan Hicks. That'll be one of the best linebacking cores to watch. With their second round pick, they took Rondell Moore out of Purdue. I think that Rondell Moore is a great pick, aside from the fact that he's only played one healthy season at Purdue. If he can stay healthy, then this is going to be a very explosive pick because they did need another wide receiver to take some load off of DeAndre Hopkins and, not be targeting him on almost all of their plays. They do have Christian Kirk. They did sign AJ Green, but I feel that Rondell Moore will be more impactful and more consistent. He had 37 missed tackles in his one fully healthy season at Purdue, and so I think that he can be much more explosive than either Kirk or AJ Green, along with DeAndre Hopkins. Now, for their late round picks, I really, really like their sixth round pick, Tay Gowan, or Gowan, however you say it. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that name. But I think that he was one of the best cornerback prospects of this draft. This draft, aside from like the first round big names like J.C. Horn, Caleb Farley, and Patrick Surtain, it wasn't huge on cornerbacks, but I think that Tay Gowan was a really good prospect. I think that he'll mesh well in Arizona, and I think that he'll definitely be a really good competitor before the season starts to Malcolm Butler, Robert Alford, and Marco Wilson, who they picked in the fourth round as well this year. Overall, they shored up on a lot of depth. I think that they did reach for Zaven Collins, but I think Rondell Moore is a great pick. I'm going to give Arizona a B plus for this draft. Next, you have the Atlanta Falcons. Their first round pick was almost a no-brainer. A lot of people before a couple of weeks before the draft thought they might take a QB, but Kyle Pitts is an amazing weapon, and if Julio or Ridley were to get injured, then Matt Ryan would still have two reliable weapons to throw to, considering that in the past they have had some injury issues. So I think that this is great for the Atlanta offense and will give them another target which defenses will have to figure out ways to counter and will probably get Julio and Ridley even more open, if anything. In their second round, they took Richie Grant for safety. This is actually a nice pick because they lost Keanu Neal this offseason. I can't wait to see how he plays and whether he starts or not in the Falcons defense, which does need some work. The only problem I had with this pick is that Trayvon Merrick was still on the board, and I think that Trayvon Merrick should have been the first safety gone in this draft. Then they took Jalen Mayfield out of Michigan. I really like Jalen Mayfield. I'm not sure why he fell this far. And I think that this is a great boost to their offensive line, which is solid but is inconsistent at a lot of times. Caleb McGarry is a huge weakness in that offensive line, and if he can't step up, then I think that Jalen Mayfield could be starting caliber. A pick which I'm excited for is Drew Dahlman, their fourth round center. While he doesn't seem like such a huge name, he did have a really, really nice run block grade, and we know Arthur Smith, he was the offensive coordinator in Tennessee, loves to run the ball. And I think having an agile center who can make run blocks is essential to doing that. The one concern about Drew Dahlman is that his pass blocking grade has always been very low. But I think that this is something that a lot of offensive linemen improve on when they come to the NFL. And so I'm hoping that he will be able to do that and have kind of like the Alex Mack effect. Overall, in their late rounds, they shored up on a lot of depth, which is absolutely great. I think they could get some real steals in this draft. They definitely shored up on offensive line depth. They shored up on secondary depth. They shored up on D line depth. And the start of the draft is obviously Pitts. I'm going to give the Falcons an A for this draft. They had a really great draft. Next up, we got the Baltimore Ravens. They really did good justice for their first round picks. They got Rashad Bateman with their 27th overall pick and Jason Owe with their 31st overall pick. They addressed two big needs on their team. One big need, which they didn't address in the draft, but then addressed in free agency by signing Alejandro Villanueva, is tackle. And they also addressed guard by getting Ben Cleveland from Georgia in the third round. The rest of their picks were mainly shoring up on depth. They got a cornerback in the third round, a wide receiver, and a cornerback in rounds 4 and 5. And then they got another edge and tight end with their other fifth round picks. But the Baltimore Ravens arguably had one of the best drafts. I think they had a top 5 draft. You can even argue that they had a top 3 draft. So I'm going to give the Baltimore Ravens an A+ for this draft. Next up, we have the Buffalo Bills. With their 30th overall pick in the first round, they took Gregory Rousseau out of Miami. Now, his draft stock kept falling and falling and falling, and that was because he wasn't really that productive in college, but I think that he can be great. The Bills definitely do need some consistency on defense, and that starts with getting an edge rusher. And so that was really, really big for them. They also drafted an edge rusher in the second round, Carlos Basham Jr. out of Wake Forest, and I think that this is great for depth in case they experience injuries. They also got Spencer Brown, who was a good third-round offensive lineman to shore up on some offensive line depth. The Buffalo Bills are one of the most complete teams in the NFL. A lot of these picks were just mainly for depth, but they could really turn into starting caliber players as some of the players on their team age and they have to get rid of them for cap. Given the picks they were dealt, they did a pretty good job with it. I'm going to give the Bills a B+ for this draft. Up next, we have the Carolina Panthers. I think that taking J.C. Horn with the 8th overall pick was a huge reach. If they wanted a cornerback, they should have gone Patrick Surtain, who was still on the board and was taken a pick later after J.C. Horn. J.C. Horn really doesn't fit Carolina's scheme. Okay, J.C. Horn is an elite press man coverage cornerback, but Carolina's corners usually play off and they mix up man and zone. And so I'm not sure how well J.C. Horn will fit that scheme. Maybe he will adapt to fit it, but for now, it doesn't seem like a good pick just because of the circumstances and who was on the board before him. With their second pick, they got Terrence Marshall out of LSU. I think this is a great pick and a great pick for depth because they kind of need a wide receiver 3 behind DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson. And with their third round pick, they got Brady Christensen, offensive tackle out of BYU. They did need to shore up on that offensive line a little bit. They need to protect Sam Darnold and give him as many weapons if he needs to be in a position to succeed. The rest of their picks were mostly just for depth across all different positions like running back, interior defensive lineman, cornerback, offensive line, wide receiver, and even long snapper, actually. So while I like the Terrence Marshall pick a lot and a few of their other depth picks, I don't like the J.C. Horn pick at all. And so Carolina, for me, gets a B-. Next up, we got the Chicago Bears. And obviously, their draft, the star of the show for their draft was Justin Fields. Okay, they traded up 9 spots in the draft to get him. Yes, they gave up a first-round pick next year and a couple of other assets to get Justin Fields. But they are showing that they invested in their future in Justin Fields because they need a good quarterback, and good quarterback play will actually make that offense click because that was the biggest thing they've been lacking over the past many, many seasons. And especially last season, it showed because, they have such talented wide receivers in Allen Robinson and Darnell Mooney, and David Montgomery is actually kind of underrated. And so in order to improve that offense and make it grow to its full potential, they need a quarterback and they need offensive linemen. And for offensive linemen, they did address that well in the second round with Taven Jenkins, who I thought should have gone in the first round. And they got rid of Charles Leno, too, who sucked last year. And so they're really shoring up that offense and proving that they can compete in the NFC North, regardless if Rodgers is there or not. I know I'm going to get a lot of hate for that because, Rodgers in the past has owned the Bears, but with a better offense, the Bears can compete with the Packers and the Vikings. Most of their other picks were for depth. They had 5 other picks in this draft. They didn't have a 3rd or 4th round pick, but they had 1 5th round pick, 3 6th round picks, and a 7th round pick, and almost all of them were for depth. But because of the first two picks, that really showed how committed they are to rebuilding that offense and reshoring it up and making it grow to the biggest potential it can be at. Uh, the Bears should get an A+ for this draft. It was truly a brilliant draft. Next up, we got the Cincinnati Bengals. Their first round pick at number 5, they selected the best wide receiver in this draft, Jamar Chase. I love, love, love this pick. Yes, I wanted them to pick Penei Sewell because, receivers can only help so much if Joe Burrow has time to throw. The good thing is, though, they address offensive tackle in the second round with Jackson Carman, who's a pretty good offensive line prospect. At least he was coming into the draft. And I think that reuniting Chase with Burrow really gives that college connection and really gives the chemistry that the Bengals offense needs. Drafting an offensive lineman in the second round was actually a smart strategy because Chase is just too good of a talent to pass up on, and there were not many wide receivers that they probably could have found in the second round. They also got Joseph Osai out of Texas, who I thought should have been gone in the second round, but they picked him in the third round. I think that this is a great pick to shore up that defense a little bit. They got Trey Hendrickson in the offseason, and they added a few more people. But, I think that the Bengals can definitely take a leap forward. They got a wide receiver, and Jamar Chase is obviously Joe Burrow's favorite. They got an offensive lineman to start rebuilding that unit and give Joe Mixon some room to run. And they got a lot of players on defense in the late round. So, if any of those players pan out, uh, the Bengals could be potentially a dangerous team within the next 2-3 years. For everyone the Bengals picked, they got really, really great value. I feel like they should have taken Penei Sewell in the first round and then went wide receiver second round, but Jamar Chase is still a great pick, and they still got an offensive tackle in the second round. For this reason, I will give the Cincinnati Bengals an A- for this draft. Next up, we got the Cleveland Browns. With the 26th overall pick, they took Greg Newsome. This is a great pick. They did need some secondary depth, and I think that he gives that to them. Uh, you know, but I think the biggest thing in this draft for them was drafting JOK in the second round. In the second round, he really shouldn't have even fallen there. I thought that he should have gone way earlier in the first round, even to maybe Arizona or someone. But the fact that he fell to pick 52 in the second round is just a testament to how big of a steal this is. And he's going to be a great player and someone who they really, really need because arguably the linebacking core was probably the biggest problem for their defense last season. Creating a more complete defense along with that already dangerous offense will literally make them like a Super Bowl caliber team. If the Browns did make the AFC Championship at least, I honestly would not be surprised, and it's because they're shoring up on positions of need in early rounds, and this is just a great thing for them. They also added a lot of depth to interior defensive linemen. They added an offensive lineman, a safety, and a backup running back in Demetric Felton in the sixth round, and I think that because they had an all-around great draft and got JOK in the second round, I think that the Browns deserve an A+ for this draft. Next up, we had the Dallas Cowboys. Now, the interesting thing about the Dallas Cowboys is everyone expected them to take Patrick Surtain until he went to the Denver Broncos at pick 9. Then the Cowboys traded 2 picks down with the Philadelphia Eagles and still got linebacker Micah Parsons. Now, I don't think that linebacker was an obvious need for the Cowboys because they already have Jalen Smith and Leighton Vander Esch, but Vander Esch is kind of injury prone. Parsons was definitely the best prospect in this draft and one of the best prospects that we have seen in a long, long time at the linebacker position. And I think that the Cowboys went with the right idea of take the best player available on defense. Did they still need to address cornerback? Absolutely. Did they still need to address secondary? Absolutely. Um, but in the second round, they kind of made up for it by drafting Kelvin Joseph out of Kentucky. He's a really, really fast cornerback. He has great movement. He's able to, move stride for stride with wide receivers. On tape, he did seem a little bit inconsistent, and Pro Football Focus actually didn't really give him uh, a high ranking. But to be honest, those rankings can be a very, very inconsistent at times. And watching some tape, I thought that he was a very good cornerback prospect in the second round, one of the better ones there was in the second round. And there was really not much the Cowboys could have done at that position. So this is a good pick, all things considered. Most of these later picks were for depth. I really like the Jabril Cox pick. I think that he probably should have been picked a little earlier. But a lot of these picks were for defense, which was the biggest problem with their team. Because look at it. On offense, you have Dak Prescott coming back. You got a lot of offensive linemen coming back. That offense should go back to being at least top 10, if not top 5. I think it'll be a top 5 offense this upcoming year. But given who is taken above them and, uh, I guess like what their draft strategy was, go all in on defense. I think that Dallas did a pretty good job with this draft, and so I'm gonna give them a B plus. All right. Next up, we have the Denver Broncos. So the Denver Broncos, their draft was a little bit complex. I felt mixed about their draft. The reason being is because quarterback was by far their biggest need. Drew Lock is not their answer, is extremely inconsistent, and turns the ball over way too much. And Patrick Surtain, he's a great player, but in a position of absolutely no need. If anything, he is at a position they least need on defense because look who they have in that cornerback room. They have Kyle Fuller and they already have Bryce Callahan. That secondary is awesome. So while Surtain is a great pick, it's really one that they didn't need at all. However, in the second round, they did get Javonte Williams. They did lose Philip Lindsay this offseason. And I think Javonte Williams could be valuable in creating a 1-2 punch with Melvin Gordon. Javonte Williams was amazing in college. He broke 76 tackles in one season in North Carolina. That's absolutely impressive. And, if he can keep doing that in the NFL, it's going to cause a lot of trouble for defenses. And then you mix that in with Melvin Gordon, who's already a solid back um, in a 1-2 punch. There's a number of different ways you can take the Broncos offense. They also needed to shore up on offensive linemen, and they got Quinn Meinerz, or Miners, however you say it, from Wisconsin Whitewater. This is a great pick. I thought Meinerz should have gone in the second round, but this is a great pick to shore up on places where they needed it the most. The rest of their picks, they did a good job shoring up on depth at edge rusher because Von Miller is getting old. They got another cornerback in round 7. They got a wide receiver in round 6 and 2 safeties in round 5. So overall, I didn't like the Patrick Surtain pick. They definitely should have drafted a quarterback in this draft. In the first round of this draft, they had Justin Fields and Mac Jones on the board. They should have gone Justin Fields for sure. But all things considered, the rest of the draft was a great draft for them. So I'm giving them a B plus. Next up, you have the Detroit Lions. With their first round pick, they selected Penei Sewell. Now, they do definitely need wide receivers. However, Penei Sewell was definitely the best player on the board, and he is a generational offensive lineman and will provide great, great, great protection for Jared Goff and then just an anchor to the offensive lineman as a whole. That offensive line, outside of Frank Ragnow, was not that good, but Penei Sewell and Frank Ragnow can anchor the whole offensive line and also give DeAndre Swift great running lanes. If they focus on the run game, that should be nice for their offense. The next biggest need for the Detroit Lions was their defense, aside from wide receiver core, because that defense was just shaky all around. But getting defensive linemen really helps them build from inside to out because the fundamental key to defense is pass rush. They already have Aquara, but they needed some more defensive linemen to make a lasting impact on that defense. I do like Amon St. Brown out of USC. I don't think that he's the complete answer to their wide receiver core issues and their need for wide receivers, but he definitely is a good prospect, and I can't wait to see how explosive he is in the NFL. Overall, the Lions didn't really address wide receiver well, but they did address offensive line. They did address defense well throughout the entire draft. The Lions draft, give me a B. Next up, we have the Green Bay Packers. I think they reached a lot for cornerback Eric Stokes. He's solid, but he's a second-round pick at best. And considering how happy Aaron Rodgers was on the day of the draft, or rather how unhappy, I don't think that this was the right way to go. They probably should have picked a wide receiver here. With their second-round pick, they drafted a center, Josh Myers out of Ohio State. This is a good pick, but however, he's never earned a grade of 75, I think, over a full season, and there were a lot better centers on the board in round 2. So I think this was another huge reach by the Green Bay Packers. I really like their third round pick though, Amari Rodgers out of Clemson. He can be another second complimentary target. There will be a competition for wide receiver too, and if there's inconsistency at that position, then it just lessens and lessens and lessens Aaron Rodgers' chances of staying in Green Bay for this year and for the long term. Overall, Green Bay did shore up on some depth, but they reached immensely with their first and second round picks. Their draft gets a C plus. Next up, we have the Houston Texans. At this position, there was really not much they could have done. Their highest pick was the third round pick, and they had to take a quarterback just because of the uncertainty of the Deshaun Watson situation. They took Davis Mills out of Stanford, which is not like a horrible uh, pick, but it's the best they could have done at that spot. They got Nico Collins out of Michigan, okay wide receiver, I guess, but just because of how horribly Bill O'Brien managed the team, they didn't have much draft assets to work with, and that's why I'm giving them a draft grade of a C. Next up, we have the Indianapolis Colts. With their first round pick, they took Quiddy Pye. Great player. I think that he'll be great in the NFL. Even though he wasn't that productive in college, he definitely has the physicality to be productive in the NFL. They took another edge rusher in the second round. However, one glaring need that they did not address was offensive tackle. Anthony Costanzo was one of the best players on their offensive line, and probably the second or third best behind Quentin Nelson and Ryan Kelly, retired this offseason. And if they want to replace him, they needed a generational offensive tackle, which they didn't really get in the draft. They did bolster that defense a lot, and they don't have to re-sign Justin Houston, which is a great cap move for them. But still, they needed to fill that hole in their offensive line, and that's why the Indianapolis Colts get a B minus for this draft, just because they didn't fill a position of need. Next up, we have the Jacksonville Jaguars. Obviously, with the first overall pick, no-brainer, Trevor Lawrence, great pick. I think that if he stays healthy and produces, he will win Rookie of the Year, and he's definitely their future. They want to build that franchise around him. However, with their second first-round pick, I really hated this pick, and they took Travis Etienne out of Clemson. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that as well. As you guys know, I'm terrible at pronouncing some of these names, but I think that this was a bad pick just because they had so many other needs on their team. Their entire team is going through a rebuild right now, but running back was one of the few bright spots on their team last season because James Robinson was a really, really big steal. He was undrafted and still played like a top 10 running back last season. And this pick was of absolutely no need unless they were going to run a 1-2 punch or something. And even then, running backs are the most replaceable position in football and are not worth first round picks in most cases. In the second round, they got Tyson Campbell out of Georgia. This is a great pick. They did need some secondary depth. Their secondary play was among the worst in the NFL. I felt like they should have gone Trayvon Merrick, though, because their safety play was the worst in the NFL. Dead last. They also got Walker Little, which is good for offensive line depth. And then they got Andre Cisco, who's an okay pick, I guess, in the third round, but I really still think they should have gone Merrick. The Jags did have some good picks, but I think ETN was a big miss, so this draft gets a B plus. Next up, we have the Kansas City Chiefs. They traded their first round pick away. Not much they could have done there, but in the second round, they did get Nick Bolton and Creed Humphrey. They did need linebacker depth. Nick Bolton is not the most athletic prospect. However, he has amazing instincts. He's very, very intelligent, and I think that intelligence makes up for the lack of athleticism. Next, you have Creed Humphrey, who's a center. He's an immediate day one starting center. He can even step in at guard spots if needed. And he's definitely very, very versatile and can both run block and pass block. The rest of their picks were purely for depth. They got an edge, a tight end, a wide receiver, and a guard. And so I think that the Chiefs overall, while they didn't have a first round pick, they did good for what they did have. So I'm going to give them a B plus. Next up, we have the Las Vegas Raiders, and this is where I'm about to get a little bit heated, because I actually really, really like the Raiders. I really like Derek Carr. I really like Darren Waller. I really like that offense, but I hated that first round pick, Alex Leatherwood out of Alabama. Yes, did they need offensive linemen? Absolutely. And I kind of blame Mike Mayock for putting them in this position because he traded three great offensive linemen for bags of chips, and so if he had gotten more value out of that, I wish he had gotten more value out of that. And this pick just completely blew the point of that first round pick. They still had Christian Darrisaw, who was one of the best offensive line prospects in the draft, on the board, and didn't take him there. And Alex Leatherwood is at best a second round pick. And so that's why I did not like this pick at all. I really like their pick of Trayvon Merrick. I'm surprised that he fell that far into the second round, but they still got a lot of holes to fill, and they shored up on depth for sure in late rounds. But I still think that the two third-round picks were reaches, and so I didn't really like the Raiders draft at all, aside from Merrick, and that's why I'm giving it a C. Next, we have the Los Angeles Chargers. Prior to the draft, I stressed how important it was for the Chargers to get offensive line. And Rashawn Slater fell right into their lap. He was the second best offensive line prospect in this draft, behind only Penei Sewell. He is generational offensive lineman. As a Vikings fan, I honestly wish that he fell to us, but this is an amazing pick for the Chargers and a pick they very much needed. Give Herbert time. It's a wrap. That offense is borderline unstoppable. The Chargers are one of the most complete teams in the NFL, but that cornerback room is very, very thin. So I think that drafting Asante Samuel Jr. with their second round pick was a very, very logical choice. And frankly, he can be a day one starter. Aside from these two picks, the rest of their picks were mainly for depth. I really like the Josh Palmer pick. He can be a solid wide receiver 3 and compete with Jalen Guyton for that spot. I think that shoring up on depth is something that the Chargers do need, because if they hit injuries, then having a lot of depth from the draft is good. But the highlights of this draft were definitely Rashawn Slater and Asante Samuel Jr., and that is why the Los Angeles Chargers are getting an A+ for this draft. They had a truly brilliant draft. All right, next up, we have the other team in Los Angeles, the Los Angeles Rams. They didn't have a first-round pick. This was part of the Jalen Ramsey deal in 2019. This was an okay-ish draft for the Rams. They really drafted a lot of depth players. Tutu Atwell is not someone of very big need, but he is very, very good against man coverage. Ernest Jones was a great run stopper, and the rest of their picks were mostly for depth in other places. And so I think the Rams, for this draft, they will be getting a B just because they were limited by the number of picks they had. However, the Rams' strategy is very, very smart. They realize they don't draft well in early rounds, and they trade those picks for players of extremely great value. Next up, you have the Miami Dolphins. Now, the Miami Dolphins had 2 first-round picks. One of them came from the Houston Texans, which they then swapped with the Philadelphia Eagles and San Francisco 49ers in a 3-way trade. And with this pick, they got Jalen Waddle out of Alabama. Now, Jalen Waddle is one of the most explosive wide receivers in this draft. I think he's the second most explosive wide receiver in the draft after Jamar Chase. This was a truly brilliant pick. Obviously, they had concerns about Devontae Smith's size and his weight. So I think that Jalen Waddle was a good pick in this situation. And he's reunited with Tua Tagovailoa, with who he'll have great chemistry with. Receiver was one of the biggest problems for Miami's offense because they had a lot of drops and injuries in that receiver core as well. And so I think Jalen Waddle will bring that consistency to that receiver core, along with Will Fuller, who they added in the offseason. They also got Jalen Phillips with the 18th overall pick. This is a great pick. They really needed edge rusher and to shore up that defensive line to make that defense top 5 again after they lost Shaq Lawson and Kyle Van Noy. And so I think that Jalen Phillips is a generational edge rusher and will provide a great complement to Christian Wilkins and Emmanuel Ogbah. Next up, Miami got Javon Holland. This is actually a great pick. They just released Bobby McCain really recently, and to replace him, this is a great pick because he was a great coverage player when he was at Oregon and the second best safety in this draft behind Trayvon Merrick. With their other second-round pick, they got Liam Eichenberg. They got rid of Eric Flowers, and so they did need an offensive lineman. And Eichenberg from Notre Dame, he's one of the best prospects in this draft, and I'm surprised he fell that far to Miami. And this is good because they need some offensive line depth and someone to replace Flowers. With their other picks, they took a tight end, another offensive lineman, and a running back. So they didn't really shore up on too much depth, but given the number of picks they had, they did what they could. And so Miami definitely gets an A- because they got great value with their early picks. Next up, we have my team, the Minnesota Vikings. With the 23rd overall pick, the Minnesota Vikings selected Christian Darrisaw out of Virginia Tech. I love this pick. As a Vikings fan, I can tell you guys that I wouldn't have minded if we took him at 14. But the fact that we traded down and still got Christian Darrisaw is just a testament to how great this pick was. He's one of the best offensive linemen in the draft. We really needed a tackle after we let Riley Reif go, and this guy can run block and pass block, which is exactly what we need for our offensive line. We didn't have a second-round pick. We traded that for Yannick Ngakoue in 2020. With our first third round pick, we had 4 third round picks. With our first one, we took Kellen Mond, quarterback out of Texas A&M. Now, Kellen Mond is a project. I can tell you this much. I was not that much of a fan of the pick when it came out, but he is a project. He can sit behind Kirk Cousins for 2 years, learn, and who knows, maybe even develop into a good starter. But for now, I was not that sold on the pick. With our next third round pick, we took Chaz Surratt, an extremely intelligent and versatile linebacker who will give us some depth as Eric Kendricks and Anthony Barr continue to age. Kendricks is still great. Anthony Barr got injured last season and has dealt with injuries for the past 2 seasons, minor or major. And so I think that this pick makes a lot of sense. With our third round pick, we got Wyatt Davis, a guard. I'm so glad that we got a guard because this was probably our biggest position of need across our entire roster. The reason being is because Dakota Dozier and Drew Samia were literally ranked as the 2 worst guards in the NFL through all the snaps that they played. In run blocking and pass blocking, they could do neither. And then with our other third round pick, our last one, we got Patrick Jones out of Pittsburgh. Dude has insanely long arms. Yes, he's a third round pick, but I think that he can provide some great competition for Stephen Weatherly and DJ Wanham as to who will be the second edge rusher behind Danielle Hunter. In our late rounds, we focused on depth and we also focused on special teams because special teams was one of the biggest issues on our team besides having an injured defense last season. We averaged among the worst in kick return and punt return yards, and I think that Kanan Nwangwu and Amir Smith-Marset out of Iowa State and Iowa, respectively, who we took in the 4th and 5th rounds, respectively, can provide some great competition as to who will return kicks and who will return punts. We also got Cam Bynum out of California. He can play cornerback or safety, but this is great for cornerback depth because who knows, we can maybe even develop him into a star, and he can definitely learn from Patrick Peterson being there because Patrick Peterson is on a 1-year deal and won't be with us after this season. While it may seem biased, the Minnesota Vikings really picked players of need at every single position. I don't like the Kellen Mond pick, but overall the Vikings had an amazing draft, really didn't miss on any single pick, so I will give the Minnesota Vikings an A. Next up, we have the New England Patriots with the 15th overall pick, and this is absolutely great. They let Mac Jones fall right into their hands. There was a lot of buzz, and even I thought so that they might trade up for a quarterback, but they didn't. They waited, and they got Mac Jones, which is great because he fits right into Bill Belichick's offensive system. Yes, there were concerns about his accuracy, which is why he fell so far, but, Mac Jones and Bill Belichick is a match made in heaven. He'll do great with Josh McDaniels, and he can probably even learn some from Cam Newton being there, still on the roster. With the round 2 pick, and this is what I love the most, they got Christian Barmore in round 2. Christian Barmore, I thought should have gone in round 1, but he fell all the way to their pick in round 2, which is just a testament to how big of a steal this is. This will really shore up one of the weakest parts of their defense on their otherwise strong defense, which is interior defensive linemen. In round 3, they took Ronnie Perkins, who is a great edge rusher. They definitely need some edge rusher depth. I think that if they want to rebuild that defense and make it be as great as the defense they had in the 2019 season, they need to start by rebuilding that pass rush. They've already done so much this offseason to do that, but Ronnie Perkins adds some competition, adds some depth, so that they can continue freeing up cap space in the long term. Most of the rest of their picks were for depth. They got a running back, a linebacker, a cornerback, an offensive tackle, and a wide receiver in rounds 4 through 7 for depth. But overall, this was an awesome draft by the Patriots. They didn't reach and they didn't trade up for players who they didn't need. Give the Patriots an A+. Next up, we have the New Orleans Saints. With their first round pick, this really surprised me. They took Peyton Turner. He doesn't really have a great physical profile, but he was pretty productive in his last season in college. The rest of the picks were mostly for depth. They took Pete Warner out of Ohio State, and he does have a really great frame and a really great hit power. Just concerned about his pass coverage a little bit, but the Saints are a pretty complete team. They got Ian Book out of Notre Dame. That's a pretty notable pick. He could possibly be part of that quarterback competition because Jameis Winston is not great, but a change of scenery might do him good. Overall, the Saints had limited picks to work with, and definitely they were late in every single round. And so I think that the Saints get a B- for this draft. But to be honest, there wasn't really much they could do other than shore up on depth. Next up, we got the New York Giants. So the New York Giants traded down from the number 11 pick. They got a first round pick next year from the Bears, and they traded down to the number 20 pick. And at this pick, they could have taken Christian Darrisaw. They got Kadarius Toney, who is good, but a late first round pick at best. They really should have taken an offensive lineman here, shored up that protection, and given Daniel Jones some time to throw. I think that their second round pick was a huge hit, though. Azeez Ojulari out of Georgia. That'll really bolster their pass rush. I feel like Ojulari should have probably gone in the first round, but the fact that they got him in the second round is a steal. It's really great for them. I think that the rest of their picks were mostly just for depth. They got 2 cornerbacks, an edge rusher, and a running back. I'm sorry, not a linebacker. So their first round pick was kind of a miss, but their second round pick was a big hit, and they got a first round pick for next year too. They got the Bears' first round pick next year, and so I think that the New York Giants got a B+ grade for this draft. Next, we have the other team in New York, the New York Jets. With the second overall pick, this was an absolute no-brainer. They chose Zach Wilson out of BYU, great quarterback prospect. And then they traded with the Minnesota Vikings to the 14th overall pick to get Elijah Vera Tucker to shore up that offensive line. It's clear that they're committed to protecting Zach Wilson and putting him in a better position to succeed than he is. While he is in the worst position to succeed out of any of the quarterbacks taken in the first round, they are trying to make that better. Elijah Vera Tucker was really a great pick, playing alongside Mekhi Becton, who they took last year. In round 2, they got Elijah Moore out of Ole Miss. Give Wilson another weapon to throw to, along with Jamison Crowder, who's already there, and Denzel Mims, who's already there. Then they got Michael Carter, Jamie Sherwood, and a bunch of other depth players to shore up that defense a lot. If any of them breaks out, then this draft would be a really, really big home run. Already, this was a great draft, though. Give the New York Jets an A. Next up, we have the Philadelphia Eagles. They really had a lot of needs to fill in their team. They needed a wide receiver. They needed someone to replace their aging offensive lineman. They needed secondary help. They needed a better linebacking core or some linebacker depth. Their defensive linemen are also getting a little old. They need depth there. But with their first round pick, they traded the number 12 overall pick to the Dallas Cowboys for the number 10 overall pick. And with this pick, they took Devontae Smith, the best wide receiver on the board at that time. Yes, he's shown size concerns, but he's super, super explosive. He can play out wide or in the slot. Doesn't really matter. He can get open against any type of coverage. And so this is really, really a great pick. He did play with Jalen Hurts when Jalen Hurts was at Alabama, so you got that college connection. So I think that this was a huge hit for Howie. In their second round, they took Landon Dickerson out of Alabama. I think that Landon Dickerson should not have fell this far. He probably should have gone higher, but there were obviously concerns about injuries, and there was definitely like a medical red flag for that. But this was still a great pick. They needed some offensive line depth, and so they're getting it here and committed to building around Jalen Hurts. The rest of their picks were mainly just for depth and showing up that defense a lot. And so I think that the Eagles really, really had a great draft, though, overall. And Smith was a great pick. Dickerson was a great pick. And I think that Gainwell in round 5 could also be someone to watch out for, just in that mix with Miles Sanders and Boston Scott. So for me, give the Eagles an A-. Next up is the Pittsburgh Steelers. With their first round pick, the 24th overall pick, they picked Najee Harris out of Alabama. Obviously, they needed a running back because James Conner was gone. Usually I'm against picking running backs in the first round, but Najee Harris is, I feel like, a generational running back, and he was also a great pass-catching back in college, and so I think that that can continue. Pittsburgh really just needs to use him well and, stick to being a run-heavy offense and rely on that because, they're not going to get anywhere with Big Ben throwing 50 times a game. However, I didn't really like the rest of their picks, though. They took a tight end in round 2 and didn't take an offensive lineman until round 3. And offensive line was a position they really needed because this offseason alone, they lost Marquise Pouncey to retirement and Alejandro Villanueva in free agency to the Ravens. And so they got a center in round 3 and a tackle in round 4, but I'm not sure if this is going to be enough to reshore that offensive line and make sure that Big Ben gets protection and Najee Harris has a line to run behind. Excuse me. Nevertheless, while I don't like the Freiermuth pick, he still is a great player. I think that he'll do well in that offense, and they definitely did need consistency at tight end because Ebron was very, very inconsistent. Overall, the Pittsburgh Steelers draft didn't really wow me. I'm going to give it a B minus. Next up, we got the San Francisco 49ers. Trey Lance, great pick. I would have gone Justin Fields, but there's nothing wrong in going Trey Lance. He can definitely develop, and he's put in a great position to develop because Shanahan is truly a great coach, and that offensive system is just set up for any quarterback to succeed. In addition, they got Aaron Banks from Notre Dame, which proves that they're committed to, restoring that interior offensive line, which was a big problem for them last season, aside from all the injuries. And then in the third round, they took Trey Sermon out of Ohio State. I'm glad they waited to take a running back because we all know that Shanahan loves his 1-2 punch running back system. They lost Jarrett McKinnon in the offseason to the Chiefs, so they need someone to have a 1-2 punch with Raheem Mostert, and I think that Trey Sermon has all the characteristics that Shanahan wants in a running back and can serve as a change of pace back to Mostert. The rest of their picks were a lot for depth. They took 2 cornerbacks, which is good because they definitely need cornerback depth. Richard Sherman is probably gone. There's a slight chance that he signs with there, but even then, he is very, very old and far out of his prime. He is not the Richard Sherman he used to be. Verrett is good, and Emmanuel Mosley is good, but depth is definitely necessary at that position, so I'm glad they got it in late rounds of the draft rather than going for cornerbacks early in the draft. And then they got some depth at offensive line, safety, and running back, which is great. But the 49ers overall had a great draft, highlighted by Lance Banks and Sermon. And so, for me, give the 49ers an A-. Next up, we have the Seattle Seahawks, and they only had 3 picks. They traded a lot of their picks. They took a wide receiver 3 in the round 2, which is actually something that they needed. I like that pick a lot. They took a cornerback in round 4, also something they needed. The cornerback room is very, very thin. And then in round 6, they took an offensive tackle, but, there's still a lot of holes on their team they need to fill on defensive line and on the offensive line. And so for the Seattle Seahawks, give me a C. There was really nothing much they could have done at this position. Next up, you have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, I didn't really expect them to take Joe Tryon out of Washington with the 32nd overall pick. I thought they would take someone else. But overall, it's not a terrible pick, but he kind of had a middling season in 2019 before he opted out this last season. And, a lot of his pressures, I watched some film on him, and a lot of his pressures were like unblocked or, coverage sacks or coverage pressures or cleanups. So I didn't really like this pick a lot. They got Kyle Trask in round 2, someone to learn from Tom Brady as he ages. The rest of their picks were mostly just for depth. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers get a B- for this draft, but considering they are the only team in history to win a Super Bowl, then keep that entire roster together, there was really not much they needed to do in this draft. And I would not be surprised to see Tampa Bay make another Super Bowl run. But that's on another topic. And for the draft, I will give them a B-. Next up, we have the Tennessee Titans. Caleb Farley is a great pick. I'm surprised he fell that far. They definitely did need a wide receiver, but they also needed a cornerback, so you couldn't have gone wrong with either a wide receiver or a corner. With their second-round pick, they got Dylan Redunz, who's great because they needed an offensive lineman to replace Dennis Kelly, who left, or actually who got cut by the Titans. Still not sure why they signed Ty Sombrilo over Dennis Kelly, but either way, they needed to fill a hole at offensive line, and Dylan Redunz does that for them. And he's a great run blocker, and that will really help Derrick Henry thrive. The rest of their picks were mostly for depth, and so Tennessee had some alright picks. Give them a B+ for me. Lastly, we have the Washington football team. They took Jamin Davis with their 19th overall pick. He's a good linebacker. Still would have taken JOK there, but he's a good linebacker, and definitely linebacker is something that they need on their defense, and he fills that role very, very well. Next, they needed offensive linemen. They probably needed a cornerback and wide receiver for depth. They got an offensive lineman in Samuel Cosme from Texas, who personally I had going in the late first round or like way earlier in the second round. The fact that he fell that far proves how great of a pick this is, and I would not be surprised to see Washington win that division and be a truly great football team. I think that they did well in this draft. The rest of their picks were mostly for depth, and I think that this draft deserves an A-. So these are my final draft grades for the 2021 NFL Draft. I think that a lot of these grades could go one way or another. These grades were mostly based on how each team did in rounds 1 through 3 and how they shored up on depth throughout the rest of their draft. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you like this video, leave a like. And if you want to see more content, hit that subscribe button. Make sure to follow my Instagram and TikTok. They'll both be in the video description. Thank you guys so much, and I'll see you guys in the next video.